Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. In this one I want to do some early speculation about the two new comics that were kind of like half announced at San Diego Comic-Con, the Avatar publishing panel. So I'm going to be talking about the Korra comic, the next Korra one-shot comic about young Kya. And also, very interestingly, a new format of comic. This is the 3-issue mini-series about the Kyoshi Warriors from ATLA. So I want to do some speculation about that. If you saw my live stream on Sunday, you probably saw a section of that live stream was effectively what I'm about to do here. I used the same kind of notes, but I think it's worth doing as a separate video as well, just because I think a lot of people are still not aware that they actually did some publishing announcements at San Diego Comic-Con, because there wasn't much reporting officially. There wasn't much any real official reporting out of the event, just fans kind of keeping other fans informed. Of course, we also have Awakening of Roku. What I'll say on that is just that because I think we're probably going to get the official description, the longer text description of this book soon-ish, I'm going to wait to do a full speculation video on Awakening of Roku until that happens. Again, it's a bigger piece of content. I want to speculate on a little bit more than just like the one-line description, so we'll get into that later. For now, because these are the sneak peek announcements where we still don't know a lot of information, let's do the basics on these books, of course. So we'll start with the Korra comic. So yeah, this is the next Korra one-shot comic. This will be the second in the trilogy after Mystery of Pension Island, the Mako and Bolin comic that also has backstory details about their mother, Naoki. I think this being Kya from Korra, of course, this is Katara and Aang's daughter, Tenzin and Bumi's sister. So because they're doing this character who we know, but we know the kind of older version of the character, we're going kind of way back here in the sense that this should be set during the Aang era. Like in that Aang will be alive throughout all of this. And the reason we sort of know that in terms of an interesting continuity point is that the description we have for this book is that it's young Kya exploring the world on her own for the first time. The title will be revealed soon. I'm assuming that means New York Comic-Con in early October. And this is where we also expect them to have a publishing panel. And because they only did a sneak peek announcement for this in the Kyoshi comic, I'm assuming they'll do the full announcement at that panel. They'll be a little bit more ready, I guess, for it. But yeah, Kya exploring the world on her own. We know that this is something that happens in her life, and we know what ends her exploration of the world is when she comes back to kind of comfort her mother, Katara, when Aang dies. So given that she's exploring the world in this comic, that means Aang is still alive. So it's a Korra comic that may be like entirely set in the Aang era. Now, I'm wondering straight away, will they do any framing from kind of present day Kya telling this backstory to, I don't know, Korra, Asami? Will it be to her brothers potentially? That kind of might be interesting, because it is a little bit of a mysterious kind of part of her life when it seems like, for the most part, she was just out there on her own exploring things. So theoretically, people close to her don't know every detail of what happened during this section of her life. So a very interesting idea. The character has a mysterious, pretty large segment of her life. Just set a story in there. 72 pages just on that. Sounds great to me. In terms of the cover, you can see here it's Kya in what looks to be a desert. Is it the desert, the Siwang Desert? I assume so. You can see the stars in the sky, the dunes in the background, and then specifically she's walking through the skeleton of a pretty large animal. I'm wondering, is this maybe something like the kind of giant sand shark thing that we saw in one of the kind of later Korra episodes? That might be an interesting kind of point here. That's the only obvious point of comparison in terms of like kind of large, kind of giant animal in the desert. It was the kind of sand shark thing that attacked them. That could be kind of an idea here. Now, what exactly the significance of that is to Kya, I'm not really sure in terms of like, why is she in the desert? you know, what's she kind of hoping to learn kind of from being here? Maybe is she following her parents' kind of journey throughout the world, like visiting some of those places? That would be an interesting kind of angle on it, but we'll get into it, I suppose, as we go forward. As for creative team, we don't know. They didn't say at the panel who the creative team is. This is one where technically I don't think we're wrong to assume it's the same creative team as on Mystery of Pension Island, because that's the way all the comics have been done previously, is that they're done in trilogies and they keep the same creative team. So it should be Alex Manick on art and Kiku Hughes as the writer, but they didn't say that here. And I get the impression that the creators themselves are maybe not super sure if this is officially announced enough to where they can talk about it, and that's a bit of a awkward situation to be in, but that should be the situation. We'll see what happens. So yeah, let's get into what we know about younger Kaya from the show already. So, of course, she is from a kind of mixed family, of course. So, Katara, Water Tribe, Aang, Avatar, air nomad, so she has that kind of air and water side of her. And of course she is a healer, so that's a big strong connection on the waterbending side of things to technically both Aang, but you know, culturally to Katara. But she also does have elements of her that are air focused, because you know, she's kind of into meditation and aura, and also the whole kind of nomadic trip around the world is very kind of air nomad. But of course, one of the big things that we know about the past with her is that she was frustrated that Aang focused more on Tenzin, even though like the others also had their own connection to the air side of the family. When it comes to kind of her relationship type stuff, when she realized that she liked women, she came out to her family. Everyone was supportive of this, especially Aang, who was specifically noted as being quite supportive, because air nomads in general are supportive of kind of same-sex relationships and stuff like that. So that was a nice kind of point to have. She also mentions in this kind of same exchange with Korra that she went on a getaway with her first girlfriend. Unclear to a certain degree if this happened while she was traveling the world, or if this was like a getaway that she had prior to then kind of leaving everyone. But you know, we might see maybe some of this stuff get kind of detailed here. The big point, though, that they're clearly basing the book on is that we have this idea that she left kind of to travel the world, to find herself as a healer, traveling the world, using her healing skills where she could. We really have very few details on what exactly she kind of got up to. And that's what we're going to find out in this book. Because again, apparently she only returns to her family after Aang dies to kind of comfort her mother in the aftermath of that. So it kind of gives us a little bit of a sense for the book might get us up to that point, like in terms of on her journey, highlighting like as an almost backstory within the book, maybe how she started this, why she decided to go on this kind of journey to find herself, but maybe why she decides to return home at the end. You know, it could be an interesting way to just fully flesh out this side of things, but we don't know what way they're going to do it. Will it be more of a character focused piece that almost kind of montages through the various kind of key points on her multi-year journey across the world, or will it be focused on one incident very specifically during this kind of era of her life? We don't know yet. Like I said, meditation, aura, we might get this kind of fleshed out kind of as we go forward. But I also want to bring up this because, again, I briefly touched on the idea of kind of family issues to a certain degree, where there's some kind of frustrations over like Aang, how he kind of handled Tenzin, some minor issues with her brothers. But then the Fog of Lost Souls little dynamic that we get with Kaya kind of implies maybe a little bit more, at least maybe on her side, because again, remember, the Fog of Lost Souls is a spirit that is able to sort of bring to the forefront your kind of like deepest, darkest memories to a certain degree. They bring up some of the worst kind of parts of your life and kind of lay them out in front of you. You have to forever sort of almost live in the worst moments type thing. And so for Kaya, what we got was this: who are you two? Tenzin, Kaya, we're your brothers. He says a little bit more after that, but that's the relevant part of that quote from Tenzin. And then she responds saying like, no, you're just a vision. I have no family. You can't tie me down. So that's super interesting that she says she has no family, you can't tie me down. Because we know that, of course, like to a certain degree, she may be left because of frustration she maybe had with kind of the family dynamic. And so she left to find herself. And maybe in the worst of those moments, she felt as strongly as, I'm separating myself completely from my family. I'm not just going to find myself, I'm unaffiliated from this point on. But also, you can't tie me down. She's almost afraid of settling down in a place. So this is definitely something that needs to be delved into a little bit more, because for some extra context, Tenzin kind of describes the way she kind of traveled the world as like flitting around the world, trying to find herself, and that she needed to settle down somewhere. So kind of others viewed what she did as perhaps not just as simple as, oh, she just wanted to go and explore the world, but that there was a sense of like, why is she doing this? And then clearly from the Fog of Lost Souls, I guess internally for Kaya, she views herself kind of saying that she has no family, can't be tied down, as a kind of like a dark kind of worst moment in her life, implying that that's not the way she thinks now or normally, but it was potentially like her worst moment. That's the way she felt, and now she maybe feels guilty about that. So there's an interesting balance that this book is, I think, going to have to try and get across in terms of if they delve into this really at all, why she goes on the journey to explore the world, about she left because of some of these issues with the family, but that, okay, the family, there's issues that needed to be resolved, as we saw going into the civil wars, but that she maybe herself didn't help things in some regard. So that they're finding the balance point of, maybe not overdoing it on the, my family was bad, but also it was just something that needed to happen. Because that's the way Civil Wars kind of settles on this at the end, is that even though Bumi and Kaya have some bad things to say, the idea is that ultimately they settle on the idea that it wasn't perfect, but there were good moments too, and that it's not worth being annoyed at each other for the rest of their lives over. So things might have been just amplified at specific moments, but it wasn't that bad. So that's the big thing they need to get into in terms of maybe the nuance here, is just like, yeah, what exact approach are they going to take when it comes to that thing? Now, at the same time, there's very much, I suppose, potentially a version of this book where we maybe don't dive into that all that much. It is just, hey, this is Kaya, this is who she is at this point in time. We're not really super addressing why she's out here on her own, but we're just characterizing her as she is, and, whatever plot she's going to get involved in that I guess leads her to the desert could be kind of interesting. Does she meet sandbenders here? There's some interesting ideas. And then it also opens up the idea to like other characters. If she's traveling the world, she could encounter some of the other kind of older characters that we know of around this era, but it's too hard to speculate on that kind of right now. So I'm intrigued by this one. I think it was definitely a good choice to do something like this, because it's a clear idea for character has a clear, open section of their life where they travel the world. So almost any story idea is kind of possible with this. They chose to do it, and now we get some fleshing out of Kaya as a character, which I think people have always wanted. Now, there is still going to be, I think, from Korra fans, including myself, the sense that, yeah, we do want the Asami comic, I think, at some point. And I think Asami probably does fit the theming that they now seem to have, which I think is probably backstory at this point, because this looks like a full backstory thing about Kaya. And then backstory is clearly an element with Naoki and the brothers with the first book, Mystery of Pension Island. And you can definitely delve into some backstory stuff with Asami if required. But I think that's the big thing there, is just, Korra fans wanting, fleshing out of all things, but also some slight advancement stuff as well with the main characters, and if they can balance that, like, at all. But yeah, things look good here. I think most people ultimately are pretty excited about this, and I think any of the other frustrations, I think mostly comes down to people not really understanding that we're doing core one-shot comics, and that means specific stories they're not going to do. We're not really, unfortunately, going to attempt to like advance the Korra era onwards, really. That would require us to start doing proper, you know, part 1, part 2, part 3 trilogies again, which doesn't seem to be the plan, at least right now. So exciting stuff, and here's a few things to get thinking about in terms of what way they could go about doing it. But yeah, on the Kaya side of things, definitely let me know in the comments what you think they're going to approach doing this in terms of, will it be character focused? Will it be an individual plot? How much will they dive into the whole potential issues with her family, maybe that led her to going on this kind of exploration of the world, and how that ties into stuff we saw from the dynamics in Civil Wars, as well as this kind of dynamic here in terms of Kaya and the Fog, as well as the way Tenzin describes like that era of Kaya's life. Let me know. But we'll move on to talking about the Kyoshi Warrior 3-issue miniseries. So again, it's a sneak peek, 3-issue miniseries about the Kyoshi Warriors set during the show. Every warrior will be a character and have a name. So the things they're emphasizing here is new format, set during the show. So it's not like post-show, I guess, in the comics. It's during the show to, I guess, fill in some gaps. And that potentially the focus is maybe more so on the others rather than Suki. Now, I think there's probably an element of this where if you're fleshing out the others, I think you have to have scenes from their perspective that involve Suki, but then you also have to have scenes that highlight, while Suki was doing this, here's what the others were doing. That sort of idea. So the visuals that they showed off are just concept stuff, so you'll note that there isn't really anything resembling a cover here just yet, so we have no clue when exactly this is going to release or anything like that. But you can see here the design for Suki, who looks as we expect her to, and her 4 team members here. So we have over here with the kind of Naruto ninja headband style thing, we have Rie, I guess. I'm not sure if I read the pronunciation. We have Mira here with the triangle on her headdress. Aika with the kind of circular, kind of curved headdress. And Fume, who has the almost double kind of like horn styled headdress. The reason I'm highlighting that is because I'm going to show you a bunch of screenshots from ATLA where we see Suki with other Kyoshi warriors, and where they got the idea for these 4 and kind of the, I suppose, core basis for their designs, as we'll go into here. On the other sneak peek, we just get a kind of full shot of Suki, 2 of them, and then the really nice clean line art of all of the characters, I guess, out of uniform, out of makeup, with their kind of hairstyles. So I guess that at least means we will see moments where they're in uniform, moments when they're out of uniform, which I think makes sense. Now, just before we get into going through the ATLA stuff, I think we need to address what exactly this means for Avatar Comics, because most of you will know if you've picked up any of the comics in physical format. You're either getting collected editions, where it's relatively kind of thick books, that it's multiple books collected together, big hardcover books. If you get the individual comics, you're still buying a 72-page graphic novel. They're not really referred to as issues. A one-shot comic or part 1 of like The Promise are graphic novels. They're not like issue 1 of The Promise. So the fact that they're calling this issue and it being a mini-series, to me, really says that what we're doing here is, for the first time in Avatar Comics, we are doing a 3-issue standard comic, kind of floppy comic miniseries, which should mean 3 issues. Each issue is about 20 to 22 pages, and they will be, I guess, released monthly. That is not confirmed. This is literally all the information we have on it right now. We previously knew we were getting a comic miniseries. Now we know it's a 3-issue miniseries. We don't know page count. We don't know release schedule in terms of when the first issue is coming out, let alone what gaps there will be between issues. But if they are normal issues, it should follow typical comic industry standards, which should be 20-22 pages per issue, and releasing monthly, basically. So that means within the space of basically 2 months, we'll get every issue, because issue 1, 4 weeks, issue 2, 4 weeks, issue 3. That whole idea, which should be fun to get a kind of regular release kind of cadence like that and talk about a series for more than just like the release week. But I think the immediate question I think a lot of people have is, well, that puts us as like the overall series about maybe 60 to 66 pages. It's getting awfully close to the length of a one-shot comic or part 1 of like The Promise, 72 pages. Why isn't this just like a Kyoshi Warrior one-shot comic? Now, obviously the issue format, where you actually get to end issue 1 on a specific note, does allow them to tell the story in a somewhat interesting way. It might also be something just to maybe give the creative team an interesting kind of cadence to kind of work on the book, where they get to technically complete the first issue, move on to the second issue, rather than having this kind of big 72-page chunk that all needs to be done at once. That might be something that they're experimenting with this kind of series, because we don't know if this is like meant to be sort of a replacement for Avatar one-shot comics, or this is just they're debuting this new format. It happens to be an ATLA story, but there will also be a new Avatar one-shot comic announced at a later point. We don't know the creative team on this one either, which is a bit unfortunate. If it is a switch over of the ATLA creative team, it should be Peter Wortman on art, Faith Erin Hicks writing, because I think we know they are still working on something. We just don't know what it is. But at least the very clean art right there, I don't immediately jump to thinking that's Peter Wortman, but we'll have to wait and see what they do with this. I would much prefer it if this was a kind of third type of series that we're getting. So we're getting Korra one-shot comics, Avatar one-shot comics, and these miniseries are things that can happen rather than a replacement. But I'm eager to see how this goes and how it works for them in terms of like issue length. Like, will they give them extra pages? You know, that would be kind of cool if they did something a little bit different, where there may be slightly longer issues, like maybe 30 pages an issue, but I don't really know what they're exactly planning to do. And then, do they have plans for another miniseries after this, or are they waiting to see how this one does? Because I would say the big thing that's a big shift from previous releases is that the way, I guess, the physical releases are going to work here, if it is a standard comic issue, is that you won't be able to just buy the new release comic from like Barnes & Noble or Amazon or whatever, because it's a single issue, so it will only be available in physical format in your local comic book store. Of course, when all 3 issues are out, they'll eventually collect them together into a graphic novel that will be available everywhere, but you'll have to wait until the end. Now, of course, there's digital releases for the individual issues, of course, and that's cool, but it does kind of change up what we typically are used to as Avatar fans with our comics, where you can pretty much get everything except Free Comic Book Day issues, you know, from other stores, and you only have to go to the comic store specifically for Free Comic Book Day. But now you actually have to go if you want the individual issues. Another interesting point on that would be that if this is our first time getting a proper single issue style format for Avatar comics, is that variant covers might actually be a thing for the first time in Avatar. We're so used to when a book gets a cover, that's just the cover. Maybe when different versions come out, like, you know, you have the omnibus cover, you have the library edition cover, but like Kyoshi Warriors issue number 1 may end up having, like, I don't know, 3 separate covers. And that creates an interesting kind of collectible aspect that we haven't ever really had before with Avatar comics, because they've only ever had one standard cover for the individual releases. So a few interesting things just with the format that's worth kind of mentioning here. But now, in terms of speculation, all they've said is that it's Kyoshi Warriors during the show, meaning we basically have to dive into Suki and the other Kyoshi Warriors during the show. So let's highlight their various appearances in the show. So of course, Suki makes her debut in 104, Warriors of Kyoshi. She is next to like 4 Kyoshi Warriors, but you'll note that they all look like clones of each other. There is no real effort made in this episode to design the others except Suki as looking different. Obviously, in this episode, Suki wasn't even necessarily planned to come back at this point, let alone the idea that the other Kyoshi Warriors would be needed to be more individuals much later on. So you understand that, but it's interesting to note this ultimately. We go into the comic Suki Alone, where we do get the scene depicted of when Suki actually leaves post 104 to go on her journey, meaning she's out in the world, and some of the other Kyoshi Warriors go with her. They specifically highlight these 3 going with her, but this one, of course, decides to stay behind. On the boat here at the bottom, you can see that there's at least 5 figures depicted as being on the boat, though this scene implies that there are others as well. Most of the others left as well. We're all here trying our best we can to help others, because this is obviously like Suki circa Serpent's Pass, where she's helping out at like Full Moon Bay. But clearly there's a bit of a gap between here and there. I don't think the first thing that they end up doing when they go out together is just straight to Full Moon Bay. So there's room for whatever the comics are doing to maybe tell a story of like, what was the first mission that they got up to when they left? What did they do first? And then maybe to cover, because we only really focus on Suki during this event, where of course she meets up with her friend here, but then she also meets up with Team Avatar and goes on to do Serpent's Pass, as we see here. But then she leaves at the end of this episode. She doesn't stay with Team Avatar. She then, I guess, goes back to kind of work at Full Moon Bay, back to the other Kyoshi Warriors, because a few episodes later, in Appa's Lost Days, we see that she's with the other Kyoshi Warriors, and they find Appa. Now, you'll note that there's now Suki plus 5 others. One of these just gets completely forgotten as we go into the next scene here, where they mainly emphasize that it's Suki and these 4. And I think it's effectively this shot combined, I think, with the finale scene that basically is what they probably base the idea for this story on, is the main group that Suki was with, her and the 4 other teammates. Let's flesh out those characters, because let's go through them here. You can see this girl here has the triangle symbol on her headpiece. We have the more circular headpiece here. Suki, of course, the kind of Naruto ninja headband style headpiece, the one that's kind of like almost like curvy on the top and has a kind of like the double horn maybe aesthetic here. They're the designs of the headpieces. And you'll note in the designs that we have, that was revealed in Comic-Con, we have ninja headband character, triangle, kind of circle curved, and kind of double horn here. So we have Rie, Mira, Aika, and Fume. Now, immediately you'll note, as we kind of swap between these two, that they've clearly, quite heavily to a certain degree, redesigned the characters. The headbands seem to be the main thing that they've basically kept as a kind of identifier, but especially when it comes to the hairstyles, it feels like they've really done a heavy redesign. I think to make them just stand out a little bit more, and I think match up maybe a little bit more with Suki, because of course they all look like clones back here in the early stages. I'm not sure you can obviously tell that like these 3 are meant to be 3 of the 4 that we're going to focus on, because there's not too much distinct with them here, and I think you can see that kind of across the board. Until they started doing the Kyoshi Warrior comic, they've maybe not overly focused on the continuity of the other Kyoshi Warriors too much, where, okay, she has the 2 streaks of hair coming over her ears. That's maybe the only one you can really identify as maybe being this girl with like a slightly altered hairstyle, potentially. And then, but like, which one is she? And it's like, is it Fume or someone else? It's got to be kind of tricky to do that. And you can sort of see as we go through this that, like, yeah, their hairstyles are quite different. Especially like you say, like this one, and this one. They have quite like almost large hairstyles kind of going on here. It's only this kind of girl here with the kind of ninja headband who should be Rie, who has kind of a more kind of typical hairstyle. Whereas, you know, if we go back up here, you can sort of see that, like, okay, they've even changed kind of Rie's style, where she has the kind of like 2 kind of ponytail kind of things happening here. Mira kind of has the more maybe simplified single ponytail. Aika has like the high ponytail. Fume has more of the kind of longer hair. It's interesting. But I think it's a clear effort, I think, made to just distinguish them a little bit more. Whereas, yeah, really the only identifying part right now, when we don't know them super well, is the individual kind of headbands, basically, that they're wearing. So that is cool. And then, yeah, we do have a little bit more to talk about here. So, yeah, this is a key kind of continuity point. They find Appa. They end up fighting with Mei, Azula, Ty Lee. Suki is captured and taken to the Boiling Rock because she is the leader of the Kyoshi Warriors. The others are taken to a different prison where they meet Ty Lee. Setting up the finale where Ty Lee notes that they kind of bonded in prison, and because of that she decided to join up with them. So you can see here she is here with, this should be Rie and Aika? Do I have that correct? The kind of more circly based one. Yeah, you can see Rie with the kind of square one, and then Aika with the more curved one here. That's who these characters are kind of, I guess, basically meant to be. But you'll also note here that kind of, to a certain degree, they look somewhat, you know, similar to a certain degree. So another need to maybe do the kind of redesign that kind of makes them a little bit more distinct overall. But it speaks to some continuity in terms of what they're probably going to do. Here's a clear point at which sort of the main character among the Kyoshi Warriors is separated. So I guess this will be maybe where the miniseries decides to focus on the prison where the others are taken to, and it allows for this really cool cameo appearance from Ty Lee with the other Kyoshi Warriors that actually might help to explain an important section of her story as well. So because she is a Kyoshi Warrior, so in a Kyoshi Warrior miniseries, it makes sense to cover the new Kyoshi Warrior at the end as well. So there's some kind of key points that, like, yeah, the Ty Lee connection kind of right at the end is something they can definitely go into. But in general, just exploring the others when they get kind of captured and put in prison, that's certainly a point. Potentially maybe giving you some context on, like, some of the details about what they're doing, like, just prior to this, when they actually meet up with Appa. I think maybe more closely focusing on, while Suki is having, like, Serpent's Pass happen and Full Moon Bay, what are the others doing? That could be something that's also interesting to do, and if they maybe delve into maybe a little bit more backstory stuff that maybe connects to Suki alone. That's kind of interesting as well. But yeah, it's just an interesting one to follow that path, and that, like, you know, you almost think about it and it's like, oh yeah, are any of the other Kyoshi Warriors distinct in the early episodes? And it's like, not really, actually. But yeah, I'm excited for this for multiple reasons. The new format I actually think could be quite interesting, but also I do think that just the idea of a Kyoshi Warrior miniseries is good. Because again, it can be a little bit of a kind of traveling adventure across the 3 issues where we're jumping between different sections of the story. Because yeah, you could kind of do it where, like, issue 1 is like kind of some of the other book 1 stuff that they got up to. Issue 2 can be the book 2 stuff that they got up to, and so on. Very interested to see this as it kind of comes out, as it gets revealed, you know. What is the page count? How big are the issues? What is the release schedule? And do they have plans for other miniseries as well? But I think this is a good first choice. I think a lot of people like stuff related to Kyoshi, the Kyoshi Warriors, Suki. I think there's some pretty strong potential with what they have going on here. And just the idea of, like, yeah, I'm excited to see how they attempt to kind of differently characterize the other 4 characters here, given that we really don't have too much on them right now. So yeah, gonna wrap things up here for the video. Of course, when we get more information on these books, I assume coming out of New York Comic Con we'll have more information. I'm guessing we'll get the full cover for the Kaya comic. It'll probably be fully solicited, so we might have the full description in or around New York Comic Con. the issues of this, it's hard to speculate on when exactly they're going to happen because they don't even show us a full cover. Is this a while away? Might it come out before the end of the year? We just don't know, but I'll speculate more on it when we actually get proper information. But for now, in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. What do you think is going to happen in the Kaya comic? And what are your thoughts on a new format for the Avatar comics for the Kyoshi Warrior Mini series, and how they're going to do it with the focus on, I guess, the other 4 Kyoshi Warriors as part of Suki's team. Let me know below, but otherwise that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.